Hola a todos, bienvenidos. Ya comenzaremos en un minuto. Welcome all, we'll get started in just a minute. Hola a todos, habla Leslie Rodríguez. Me encantaría empezar esta reunión pasándole la palabra a nuestra justicia del lenguaje. Hi all, this is Leslie Rodriguez. I'd love to start our meeting off by passing the mic to our amazing LG.
Hola, hola, mi nombre es Catalina y aquí junto con Wendelin y Cristian y Shell formamos parte del equipo de justicia del lenguaje para la red.
Hello, everybody. My name is Catalina, and together with Wendelin, Cristian, and Michelle, we are part of the language justice team for the network.
Bueno, aquí todos, como parte de Cultivemos, nos hemos comprometido a la justicia del lenguaje, así que esta reunión va a ser interpretada entre el inglés y el español.
So, all here as part of the Cultivemos network, have committed ourselves to language justice, and this meeting will be interpreted between English and Spanish.
Y bueno, la función de interpretación ya está activada.
And so the interpretation function has already been activated.
Para acceder a la función desde su computadora, van a buscar el globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla y eligen interpretación de idiomas y después seleccionen su canal de idiomas.
And so to access the function from your computer, you're going to find the globe on the bottom of your screen and choose language interpretation. Then you're going to select your language channel.
Y vinieron hoy por teléfono o tableta, busquen los 3 puntos en la parte inferior de su pantalla y hagan clic en más. Luego, interpretación de idiomas, seleccionen su canal y después toquen finalizar. Este último paso es el que activa la función.
And if you're joining tonight from a phone or a tablet, you're going to find the 3 dots on the bottom of your screen. You're going to select more, then language interpretation. Then you're going to select your language channel, and then you're going to click on done. Right? This is the last step is what actually activates the function.
Y todos deben elegir un canal de interpretación, a no ser de que entiendan ambos idiomas, inglés y
Right?
español.
And everyone should choose a language channel unless you fully understand both English and Spanish.
Si tienen alguna dificultad accediendo a la función de interpretación, por favor, mándenle un mensaje a Leslie por el chat y Leslie le ayudará a resolverlo.
So if you're having any issues with accessing the interpretation function, you're going to send a message to Leslie through the chat, and she will support you in resolving any issues.
Ok, entonces vamos a hacer una prueba para asegurarnos de que esté funcionando los canales de idiomas. So now we're going to do a test to make sure that our language channels are working. Voy a empezar en español. Muy bien, estamos.
I am going to start in English. We are going to start speaking in Spanish. And so the folks that are listening in English, give me a little sign, do a little dance for me, a little something. Very good. Yep, it looks like it's working. Good. Excellent. Excellent. All right, now I'm going to switch to English now.
All right, now I'm going to switch to English. All right, if there's folks listening to this Spanish, you should be able to hear Wendelin interpreting what I'm saying right now. Give us a little shimmy, something, a heart. Okay, yes, I got a heart. All right, perfect, wonderful. All right, I'm gonna switch to Spanish again. And Michelle, if you're there, would love to see some beautiful. Bueno, entonces.
Then we'll continue. So creating multilingual spaces is a collective effort that's even more important and relevant. In these spaces, these agricultural spaces, where we know that the majority of folks that sustain our food system speak multiple languages. And in these times, we interpret between multiple English and Spanishes, and we recognize that we bring many more languages into this space. Right, we invite you to share all the languages present in this space in the chat, to name, to honor, and recognize that our communities are multilingual. And these are some of the ways in which we can all support our commitment to language justice during this workshop. And the first thing is, please say your name before speaking. You know, the people listening to interpretation sometimes only hear the voice of the person interpreting and can't always tell when the speaker has changed.
Sus comentarios van a ser traducidos en vivo por
Your comments in the chat are going to be translated live by Cristian and Michelle. And please write your comments in English and Spanish so that we can all access them more easily. But if not, well, we also recommend the website Deeple can self-translate. And if you're not able to do that, don't worry about it. Right, please do make your comments in the language that you prefer. And that's what we're here for, right? To support with that. And also, please be sure to add your gender pronouns in your Zoom name, please. We also remind you to reselect your channel when you return from breakout rooms. And sometimes we might need to communicate with y'all, right? And so to avoid interrupting the person that's speaking, right, we use different signals, right? So for example, this one, right, if you see us doing this one means speak more slowly. Yeah, let's practice together, right? Let's practice this one. Any person can use this, right, at any time. Thank you. All right, if you see this sign, if we do this sign, this one means please speak up, please speak a little bit more loudly, and we can practice it together. Okay? If someone needs to use it, please feel free. Very well. We also remind you that we can only interpret one voice at a time. And so, possible, not one mic at a time. We also remind y'all to pause, breathe between one phrase and another, and to mute your microphone when you're not speaking, not participating. Now, for the folks listening to Spanish interpretation, you might notice that we use e endings instead of the traditional a or o when referring to groups of people with multiple genders, or when we don't know someone's gender. This is not a pronunciation error, but rather a purposeful choice that recognizes the expansiveness of the genders that exist in our communities. All right, now, any issues with interpretation, let us know immediately. Send a message on the chat. And thank you so much for your commitment to language justice. This is Leslie. Thank you so much for that. Welcome, welcome everyone who is just arriving. Please choose your language channel on the little globe. Also, please put a name, a number before your name. If you are bilingual, please put number 1. If you speak Spanish, please put 2. And if you speak English, only English, put number 3. Reminder that after breakout groups, after returning from breakout groups, please reselect your language channel. And I want to pass the mic over to Aley Kent. Thank you.
Hello, this is Aley. Thank you so much for all of that wonderful introduction and centering, getting us ready to go today. I really value this amazing team, language justice team, and the other leaders on the Cultivemos team. So today I am going to go through a technique, a facilitation technique, and give all of you an opportunity to practice it as well. And we'll have a lot of ways to play around with this technique and different opportunities to ask questions and think about applications. So it's all around leading productive discussions, group discussions, right? So next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so the last time, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the two tenets of the facilitative leadership. So the first was inclusive participation, which is ensuring that every voice is heard and that every insight is given the opportunity to be considered. No perspectives are allowed to dominate. And the other is profound respect, and that's really around honoring each individual equally, individually and equally, and trusting that both the individuals and the group are capable of doing the work that they have set out to do. Together, these things foster community involvement and nurture new leaders. It really is centered on the community member experience and knowledge, and it puts the community ideas out front. And really, ideally, is going to be creating realistic and attainable action plans. And so, when we come together in meetings, we come together to talk about things, we're usually trying to plan an action. We're planning social change, or we're planning something for an organization to do. And so it's really critical that our conversations are productive when we do meet. So let's go to the next slide. As another oh, I'm so glad somebody translated the little picture. As another sort of reminder of what we talked about last time, we were talking about the word facilitate. When you facilitate something, you're making it easy. But facilitating groups is not easier. It often requires a lot more planning and really just a lot of tools facilitators rely on their tools of working with groups, of interacting with people and leading conversations. And it's not magic and it's not rocket science. It's things that can be learned, but it is something that requires some practice. So I found this little image online years ago of this lady rowing this boat between, you're trying to navigate the sort of the way between chaos and rigidity in a facilitative meeting, in a meeting where you're really trying to honor, where you're trying to really, honor inclusive participation and profound respect. That's the idea. So let's go to the next slide. Ooh, I have to click it again. So so the focused conversation method is what I'll be talking about today. It is a method that was Institute of Cultural Affairs, which has been around the 1960s. And a lot of these methods were generated through groups that so a lot of And all to think last time a meeting started or come to circuits, and what should we do about this problem, about problem X, right? About this issue. So go to the slide. So I think what saying what happened a chat, or if you have something like to sit in in that situation. Certainty. They sunny. Meaning
She's
defeated, maybe. Yeah, that's what I was sort of wondering. Depends on the group and comfort or history. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I know that I've had experiencing like to like talk some, totally own this is a very way that meeting so off to productive slides. Yeah, discouraged. Some other words in the chat here, which I think are good. Good characterizations of what can happen. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to move right along with a bunch of these. And I think there's some funny animation that means you have to get the little, excuse me for 1 second. I have my chat in the wrong place. Okay, so go back for a second. Go back. I think let's try to get back to slide 9 if we can. I think you're on 12, it says here. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We can, as you sort of do that. So anyway, here's a little bit of psychology. So this first little person says senses or sentidos. So we take in the world, first thing that happens when we hear something, when we experience anything, right? We hear something, we see something, we smell something, we feel something, we experience something. We take in the world with our senses. So you can give this little person their senses label there. Yeah, okay, so then next. Keep going till we get to the next little person, the next little human. And click again. I forgot there's all these little animations. Click. Sorry, Michi. So click again. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so after we take in the world with our senses, we often have an immediate, well, often, we always really, we have an immediate, often unconscious but sometimes visceral, sometimes paralyzing response to that experience, right? Next. We're gonna have 4 little people here when we're all said and done. All right, so head. So because we're conscious beings, we can stand back from the stimuli, right? So it's like we have all these feelings. We can stand back from the stimuli and our responses to it, and we can look at the meaning, you know, and try to interpret, right? We get into what is happening here? What is the meaning of this thing that I'm experiencing? So we interpret values or significance, or we form a theory about the experience. Okay, we start to answer this question, so what, right? So what does this mean? And then finally, what's our 4th stage? Yeah, so finally, you know, we'll relate that information to our own situation, and we form an opinion, or we decide how to apply the new knowledge or skill, right? So we answer this question, now what? Okay, so we've gone from taking in an experience, having a reaction to it, applying meaning to it, and then taking action. Let me go to the next slide. Let's see what happens. Oh dear. All right, keep going. Click. I should take all of these animations off before I send this out. Keep going. Let's get all of these words up here. Yeah, okay. So in ICA speak, these stages of processing are referred to as the objective level, the reflexive level, interpretive, and then decision. In English, some of us, you know, refer to these as orid. So go to the next slide. Is 4 other terms that are maybe a bit easier to understand or digest. Yeah. So some of you may have even heard this, right? So what, gut, so what, and now what? I was wondering, is there a good version of this in Spanish? I mean, what, gut, so what, now what rhymes, which I think is helpful to remember, or makes it easier to remember. But I'd love to figure out a catchy phrase in Spanish for this. But anyway, everyone goes through this process all the time, right? Someone throws a ball at you, you see the ball coming at you, you're like, ah, and you either like duck or you catch it or you do something, right? You in a split second, you go through these phases here, right? Or sometimes you take a much longer to move through these steps. I'd love to see in the chat if anyone has any thoughts. Which level do you most often seem to gravitate towards? Everyone usually has one of these 4 levels that they tend to spend more time in. It's not really to type people, but it's a way to recognize that we're all different in our way of processing events and experiences. If anyone feels bold, they can type in the chat what they tend to gravitate towards. I know I tend to gravitate towards action, decisional. All right, yeah. Now what? Cool. So go to the next, let's see the next slide. This looks like this has some, weird. Okay, no, this is good. All right, so this is a little busy, but you'll see that it's it all kind of makes sense. So if we apply this this theory, right, this what gut so what now what theory to a group setting, and we have 4 different people sitting around a table now, we have 4 different people that tend to live in a different one of each of these levels of processing. Okay, so we're going to say, so the question is posed, what do we do about problem X? We go back to our original question. Person A here at the top lives in the decisional. They've jumped to a decision and they spend the whole meeting defending it. Yeah, person B might be more of an, yeah, I gotta move my chat bubble over. I lost my cursor. Sorry, give me a second. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I'm gonna forget that. Anyway, so person B is more, lives in like more of the objective level, right? So they just want more information. They feel like there's not enough, you know, facts or information, and they can't sort of move forward without that. Person C might want to spend more time in the interpretive level. They want to analyze and discuss every possible option, right? They're like, well, that could mean this, it could mean that. We need to consider all these different things. And, you know, person D may live more in the reflective level, right? They might be stuck on a very painful or frustrating or exciting memory of something having to do with problem X. And they want to talk about that, and they want to, or you know, they've maybe like just completely shut down because they're reminded of something. So all these different things can happen to these 4 different people sitting in a meeting, asked the same question about the same topic. So it can get a little, so anyway, so each, you know, anyway, so the point is that each person has his or her or their own pace of coming to conclusions. There's no like right or wrong patterns, but there's just learned behaviors based on each person's life experience. So when a conversation has no structure, there's often no way to ensure that each person's thinking patterns and insights can be used productively by the group, right? So often you'll have conflict or chaos or just, you know, discouragement can really result from that. So what we're trying to do as facilitators is we really want to make sure that all these different insights that people carry can be used productively, can be part of the solution. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah. So back to our other, back to our little model again here, right? So we have our objective, reflective, interpretive, and decisional levels. So when we slow it down, when we slow down getting to that question of what do we do about problem X, we find, it's called slowing down. I often say I'm backing up. Whoa, back it up, back it up. Wait a minute, like, do we have to get something else out here? So at the objective, the first level, it's what do we know about problem X, right? Or what experiences have we had with problem X? And then at the heart levels is what does this remind you of? Or what associations do you have? When have we seen this before? And then the head level is, you know, what are the options open to us? You know, what possibilities are there to do about this problem or this issue? And then the decision, what do we do about problem X, right? So it's this it's this very intentional method of backing up the conversation to make sure that you bring along everyone in the conversation. So you can, by facilitating this conversation a little differently and being very mindful about your use of questions, you can avoid swift and unconscious choices coming from individual meanings or connections that people are making, right? You slow it down and you streamline the flow of thinking to the end goal, so you bring everybody along with you. Yeah, so I mean, this ORID, we say ORID, or this focused conversation method, allows each person to go through their natural human thought process together, to come to a group decision or just a more rational or strategic decision in the context of maybe a one-on-one conversation. This method is used in many other settings. I think of this a lot in nonviolent communication, which is very much follows this same pattern of, I see, when I see the dishes in the sink, I feel really frustrated because I feel like I'm always the one that does it. I need to know that we're, working in this house together towards our shared needs. And so I request that you do the dishes every other night, right? So it's like, I see, I feel, I need, I request is very similar to this sort of senses, heart, head action. Medical protocols for asking people to recall events. A lot of medical protocols follow this very same 4-level process. Advertising messaging, right? When's the last time that you had to deal with this? That was terrible, right? We're going to solve your problem for you, therefore you have to do this. It's a very you sort of see it in a lot of places, but when you start to break it down, it's like, oh, okay, like you sort of start to see it everywhere. Are there any other contexts that people can think of where they've seen this used? And we can go to the next slide. Anybody wants to type in there? Any other context, go for it. I can't think of any others right now that are coming to the top of mind, but there are lots that have been shared with me in the past. So again, another maybe busy looking chart, but let me explain this. Let me unpack this a little bit for you. So okay, so we have the objective, reflective, interpretive, decisional, these 4 stages down the side. And so what this is getting at is the intentions at each level. So I think you're starting to probably see here, right? So at the objective level, we're looking at facts. I have facts in quotes because sometimes facts to one person are not facts to another person. So anyway, but it's the information level. It's the experiential level, the sensory impressions. And the question I asked at the beginning of this workshop was, when is the last time you were in a meeting that started this way? There's no real right or wrong answer to these questions at the objective level. It's sort of just getting people into the room, helping to focus where you're going to start, delving into. The reflective level, again, it's sort of these associations, reactions, internal responses, the feelings level, a lot of people say, but sometimes your meeting context is not really about feelings as such, but still reactions or associations people have made might be more accurate. But I asked, what do you recall feeling or experiencing during this meeting? This meeting where you were, asked this decisional level question right at the beginning. I'm seeing somebody here too is saying, I'm just looking in the chat. Okay, I'll go back to this. In the interpretive level, yeah, that's where you're starting to apply meaning and significance or values, or the value of what's going on, or purpose, implications, options. And so that's where I asked you, what often happens when conversations begin by asking for a resolution? This is the head level, right? It's where you start to, this is where you're starting to ask people to think. And then the decisional level is, okay, so, right, what's our resolution then? How, what are our next steps or our ideas? And so my decisional question to sort of lead into this lecture I just gave was, how do we make better group decisions, right? So how can we sort of move forward? And I'm just looking in the chat, somebody was saying here's another example of where they've seen this used. Experiential education. We debrief activities by asking groups, what happened, so what, and now what? And so, and I would even say there are sometimes reflective level questions in there as well, right? So what happened, how was that, how was this similar to something else you've seen in the past? Again, like, get that association in there, or the sort of internal responses. And then, so what does this mean, or how could we apply this, right? And then how can we apply this? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So just a little bit of research that support this method. Again, so at the objective level, I want to just pause a little bit at the objective and reflective level, because in our Western society, in our US educational system, we tend to skip over these a lot. We think the thinking at the objective level has been trained out of us. So you're in an English class and you read a poem, and the first question your teacher asks is, what does this poem mean, right? They're asking you to jump directly to that interpretive level, to that third stage down, which, can be really hard, especially for high schoolers or someone, or even younger kids. So, and also society, rewards us for being insightful and conclusive. And so, there's not a lot of time often spent at the objective and reflective level. And actually, we will see, you don't actually have to spend that much time at the objective or reflective level, depending on what your topic is. But it is something that can really help, again, to bring along the people who tend to, need that. Everybody really needs it, but some people really want to be there, and they can't move on without having that sort of honored and either voiced or just spent some time, in that place. And so at the objective level, the goal is that you get all voices out. Again, there's no wrong answers. No wrong answers. It can be as much, as easy as, what's your name and where are you from, or something, right? At the objective level. It's not a right or wrong thing. Ideally, you're helping to create some safety within those first 5 minutes of the meeting. Asking, what are your experiences with this? That doesn't matter. Everybody could have a different experience, but that's okay, because that's not the point, right? Because and also you get to see different people's perspectives being brought to that circle. If you pause for a minute at the objective level. We can go to the next slide when you're ready. So at the reflective level, you know, so our feelings level, our feelings, our emotions is often associated with our heart or our feelings. And so, you know, that's our limbic system, that's our amygdala. It is required to stimulate and help us make connections, and often it does, but we can either use that in a very constructive way, or we can be, you know, we can just be reactionary and acting on that sort of, you know, reaction rather than like having it inform our neocortex. Our neocortex is the thinking part, the front part of our brain, and it actually has a hard time working if your amygdala is too active or doesn't feel heard, or doesn't, right? It's like if you haven't really understood or given some time to help your limbic system process what's going on, your neocortex can kind of flatline. And that's where you get into, you know, riots and things like that, where you have lots of people who are all acting on, you know, an overactive amygdala, which maybe hasn't been, you know, hasn't had some, you know, facilitation to help it, you know, really understand what is going on there and why these reactions are happening or what associations are happening, to help get to some kind of constructive thinking at the next level. Okay, next slide. So we're going to get into some practice. We're going to get into some breakout groups and practice going through. So you're going to have one person that will be actually reading through some questions, and we'll have a chance to, you know, just sort of see what that feels like. But I wanted to show, before we did that, an example focused conversation. So when I'm going to facilitate a meeting, I give myself a couple of questions that I can, you know, sort of fall back on. And I always sort of have a couple of back pocket, I call them my back pocket, or I just know that I can like ask, you know, okay, you know, experiences and like highlights and lowlights, it'd be at the reflective level. You know, what does this mean? And what do we do, right? So it's like there's always these kind of 4 levels that I make sure I want to try to include in each discussion that I'm leading. And so here's an example 1. So if we were reviewing feedback, the topic of this is reviewing feedback on some proposal, right? So, okay, I'm leading this meeting. So the introduction is just, okay, we've received some feedback and we need to decide what to do next. The objective level is, you know, what words or reflections stood out in this feedback? You know, what caught our attention? Reflective is, you know, what did people like? You know, where do you agree with the reviewer's analysis? And where do you disagree? Yeah. Interpretive, oops, 1 second. How have other proposals been the same? How have others been different, right? What is being recommended here? This is, again, like where we start getting into the thinking part. What options are open to us? And then finally, decisional, you know, what options seem most feasible? You know, and what can we do now? And then you always got to close it, right? Thanks so much for participating. When should we meet again to check in on progress? So this is basically a model of a facilitation plan that you can write yourself before you're leading a meeting. For, you know, this particular topic is, and we're going to have 2 other topics that you'll get to practice with in a second. But the idea is that, you know, you think about it beforehand. It's like, what might be some questions I would ask the group to sort of help, you know, navigate the group through these sort of 4 levels of conversation in order to get to a, you know, productive ending. And one thing I do want to say here, so yeah, so I wrote a couple of notes to myself. I just want to sort of like make sure that I hit them here. So, you know, I usually don't ask every question that I prepare, but I always ask at least one question at each of the 4 levels. So here, like I've written out, you know, there's 2 questions at the objective level. There's 3 questions at the reflective level, because agree and disagree are 2 different questions. There's 3 at the interpretive, right? So it's like, it may be that in the context of the meeting, I don't end up having to ask all of them, but the idea is you're trying to foster a discussion. And so if you ask a question, it gets people talking and you feel like, okay, well, these other things that we might want to explore have already been covered. We don't even have to, you know, I don't have to ask that question. We can, you know, maybe we're ready to move to the next stage. And that is something that is, you do sort of learn over time as you do this. But you can see here how maybe if I removed asking a question at any one of the levels of the conversation, it might be lacking in something. So if I didn't ask any objective questions and I just jumped to, you know, what did people like, or where do you agree with the analysis, I might miss any kind of assurance of like participant clarity or familiarity with the project. Yeah, if I left out R level questions, I might miss some important perspectives or other experiences, right? Or yeah, perspectives on the feedback. Obviously, if I left out the I level and jumped right to a decision, right? What do we do about this, you know, feedback that we got? I might miss some important insights or some ideas that could be generated by the group. And then of course, D level decisions are incredibly important because that means that you can follow up on whatever you were talking about, right? Some meetings and conversations don't get to a decisional level, and then you come back to the meeting the next week and you're talking about the same thing because you never got to a decision. And so it's important sometimes to just, you know, keep an eye on these 4 levels and to see where your conversation's going, because that will usually dictate how productive the meeting feels. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. We're going to have some practice. And for this, we're going to use these scripted focused conversation worksheets. And I'm going to ask our LJ team and Leslie, are these available to everyone? Do people have these via email, or how do they get them?
This is Leslie. I will put it in the chat if folks just give me a second.
Okay. So while Leslie is doing that, I'll tell you a little bit what we're going to do. So sort of like the last slide, you will have a conversation with questions spelled out for you. You will not have to write your own questions for this, but what you're going to do is one person will volunteer to be a facilitator, and you're all going to be role playing, meaning that you'll be taking on potential you know, characteristics of potential people that would be part of a group, right? The first one, I think, I'm trying to remember now. I have a couple different scripted focus here. I think one is these ones. One is evaluating the progress of a youth project, right? And then another one is discussing next steps for the food justice movement. And I have in the New York City urban ag leaders, because was how we sort of used it. But you can be different kinds of agricultural leaders if you choose. Anyway, but it's the idea is for the group to role play these members of this group, and the leader will have a chance to just practice asking these questions and seeing what that feels like. And so after, take 15 minutes, have one person try one, and then another person can try facilitating the next one, and see what it feels like. And we'll come back and we'll talk about the experience together. Any questions about the activity? And clarifications? I can share my screen for a minute too, yeah, so Michi's asking, each person gets 15 minutes. Yes, so each leader, each conversation will have 15 minutes to happen. So there will be two people that get the opportunity to lead a focused conversation with their role-playing group there, if that makes sense. So if you have 5 people in your group, 2 of those people will be leaders, will lead a conversation with the group. So not everybody will have an opportunity to practice asking the questions, but you should all have some good experience regardless.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, congratulations for sticking with it.
Good practice.
What?
Good practice.
Good practice.
It was good practice.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Gracias todos por participar.
Thank you everyone for participating.
Yeah. Okay, so we're all back. Make sure you choose your interpretation channel again. If you have not done that. And let's pull up a couple. How did that go? How did what was the highlight of that experience for any of you that practiced it? Where was it rough going? What was the hardest part?
I can comment on the one of the parts that went well.
Okay.
Was really with facilitator, poly-facilitated, and we really had diverse or divergent experiences, and there really was space for all of that. People that seemed to me were expressing their really different experiences, and I felt open with that. I appreciated that.
Nice. Which conversation did you do? Did you do both of them, or which one?
The community project.
The youth one. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yep, our group did that as well. Nice. Yeah, we had there was a little confusion at first of just like, wait, are we role playing here? What's going on? So I hope that wasn't too confusing at the start for all of you. But where was it rough going in your groups, in your practice?
This is Leslie. I think one of the things that really stood out to me that made this rough going was thinking about like the groups that I work work with and facilitate, and how if this was an actual project, the night wouldn't be long enough for everyone to get their comments in. And folks here were a bit shy, but like thinking about that realistically, like if we had to ask all those questions, this meeting would run into 2023.
Yeah, well, and it's and like I think I said before, that is kind of a, you know, that's a sort of facilitator choice you got to make in the moment sometimes too. Like you can prepare yourself a whole lot of questions. Like, yeah, that youth build one had a whole lot of questions in it. You may not end up asking all those questions because you're like, okay, we got to move this along. Or, you know, you pick out the one or two at each level that you really think is going to get your group where you need to be. So yeah, but I mean, I hear what you're saying. It definitely can take longer. It can also, I mean, another way that I think of it sometimes too is that it's like, you know, sometimes a focus conversation takes a little longer than maybe like a quick, you know, than coming in and being like, all right, what are we going to do next? We got this feedback. However, what I have found many times is that short circuiting of the process often leads to you come back the next meeting and people are still wanting to talk about it because they didn't really feel like they got to say their piece the last time. You know, something was skipped over. And so it's something to consider, that it might feel a little longer in that meeting that you dedicate to it, but that might also help more like the group feel more resolved, and able to move on, and also maybe come up with some, you know, more strategic decisions through that process than you might get otherwise. So yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act. What other insights did people have through that process?
This is Polly. Our group definitely had a lot of facts about what happened. And they had a lot of solutions. We actually kind of didn't make very clear action steps due to my wanting to move on to the next one to give other people a chance. But there were a lot of solutions that came out. So I saw that we talked about that early on, like that people are very comfortable jumping to solutions, but I was really glad to have the facts. That's what I really liked that question. You know, what were some images from the community that you saw, or it was something to that effect. And that surfaced some really nice scenes, both chaotic scenes for people who had hard times with the youth, but also really some good scenes in our role play. So yeah, that I liked those two slowing down steps of the objective and the reflective.
Nice. Other insights or aha moments?
I would just add, this Karen, with the process, just appreciated again when thinking back that some of us had a really negative experience and complaints, and then there was someone who had a really positive experience, like, you know. And so I've been in meetings where sometimes people are spending all the time on the positive and not on, I'm just using the term positive and negative. Yeah. And it felt like there was really space for neutral, positive, negative, and it allowed, you know, I could see if we had more time, we could, it kept some of that. Like for me, because I didn't have a good experience, it like kept shame out. It kept feeling like, oh, you know, I did something wrong, or, you know, I think this sense that we could get to a point of what was working well, or what would be needed. And so for me personally, I didn't shut down, so that was good.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute too, in terms of like, yeah, making space for, yeah, that sort of the positive and the negative, as you're saying, at the reflective level. Like, ask both, always ask both. And they're two separate questions. It's like, no, what was bad and good about it? You know, it's like, okay, what went well? Okay, what was rough? And often, sometimes, I mean, there's a lot of times too where I've led meetings and I'm like, all right, so what, I asked that very question. I'm like, okay, so what was really good? Like, what went really well about this experience? And two people chime in with what went wrong with it. And I'm like, okay, hold on to that. You know, we're going to get to that in just a minute. We're going to have some space for that. So assuring people that there will be space to air their grievances as well. But thanks for sharing that insight. Any other insights? What are you going to do differently next time you try this?
This is Alex. I think what's coming up for me is rethinking the way I'm planning for a meeting and building in, I guess, like, as we were talking about this, I was saying how like my meetings aren't generally this straightforward. Like that was obviously one. Right, my roommate's talking right outside the door, if you can hear that.
We can't hear them.
Great. And I don't know, I guess like in Polly said, well, yeah, just break down each piece into the method, which I appreciated, but and I think is a great idea. I just need to reframe the way I'm preparing for discussion.
Now, what else might folks do differently? Thank you. Next time you want to try this. Okay, well, let's get the next slides on the screen. Mishi, are you still here? I haven't scared her away. Here she is. Okay, great, perfect. Yeah, so when you think about putting together a focused conversation, and when you're planning your questions, or if you haven't figured this out yet, the whole point of a focused conversation, or the structure of a focused conversation hinges on asking questions. We're asking questions of a group to generate discussion. And so when you're crafting your plan, right, you're crafting your questions. And so you want to avoid yes or no questions. Why do we want to avoid yes or no questions?
This is Polly, because you don't surface much information from a yes or no question.
Yeah. Did you like the meeting? Did you like the project? Yeah, and it also they can be very leading, right? Because you're already asking if someone feels a certain way or not, or has a certain opinion. Yeah, so practicing changing your questions from did you or do you to what about something, or how does something do something, right? That's in English, different in Spanish, but yeah, trying to avoid questions that have like just two possible answers. Avoiding why questions can be useful, because why questions tend to, it's a very visceral thing for a lot of us as children. When you're asked why, you immediately go on the defensive. And so you don't want a group of defensive people. You're trying to generate more discussion and more creative and constructive energy. So sometimes asking a why question can be very triggering. So just be very conscious of that. I didn't explain this as well, I realized when we got into our practice, but usually that O level, that first objective level question that you put out to the group, you want to make easy enough to actually be a go around. Let's go around the room and everybody say one image that stood out to them, or everybody say one word or phrase that comes to mind from that story we just read. Or something, right? Again, there's no wrong answers, but it gets all voices out at that, at the very first question in the room. It's just an easy way to get people talking. People feel their own voice in the room. And another sort of tip is to, you start easy and you get more complex is the general, right? You're going deeper. It's this idea of like very surface to depth in a focused conversation. Those 4 steps bring you from surface level to depth. Let me see. Anything else I wanted to say here? That's good. Let's go to the next slide. So just a couple more. Yeah, so again, who was it? Karen brought up the sort of the need to be able to ask people for the goods and the bads. So balancing questions at the reflective level. I call them highlights and lowlights. And it's also something that, again, in my sort of back pocket, if I walk into a room and I don't have a plan already set up, I can sort of say, okay, images, highlights, lowlights. I always ask 2 questions at the reflective level so that we can get at both sides of that to balance, to encourage that range of perspectives. And then at the interpretive level, it's, meaning, what does this mean? Or what is this telling us? Or what options do we have, right? And then what do we do? So those are sort of my like, yeah, I keep saying my back pocket, or the ones, if I don't have a plan, I can just pull those out of my head, because I get sort of social anxiety and I can totally like flatline. I can't think of like a good question if I don't have some prepared ahead of time. And that's also why I give myself like this battery of questions that I can potentially ask, because it's hard for me sometimes to think about them in the moment, to think of what I actually want to ask somebody. But if I have a couple prepared ahead of time, I can kind of pick and choose and say, oh, that's a good one for right this second. That's a good one. I'm going to ask that one. So at the same time, right, make questions specific to help people form their responses. It's always best to have things that are very specific. Make sure you can answer the questions yourself. Make sure that, like, after you put your questions together in your plan, go back and say like, okay, does this make sense? Is this too vague? Is this going to actually get the types of answers that I'm expecting, or are we going to get a whole bunch of random things? And then, the conversation goes from focus to being a little bit more scattered. So it's something to think about ahead of time. Next slide. I'm having trouble changing my own slides. And then we get into just facilitation style. Again, we're trying to, well, for one thing, it says elicit rather than present. We're trying to get people to talk rather than you as the facilitator being the center of the room. You don't want to be the center of a room. I remember somebody telling me once, they're like, the sign of a great facilitator is everybody leaves the meeting saying, we got a lot done. And I don't even remember who was in charge. Like, I don't remember who the facilitator was, but that was a really good meeting, and so it's like, it's not, because again, it's like, it's not about you, right? We're centering the group. We're talking about centering the group last time, rather than being the presenter and centering yourself. So I have here affirm participative behavior, not the content. So if someone raises their hand and says something, it's thank you very much for sharing, right? Maybe rather than saying, wow, that's a really good point, good idea. Because then the person sitting next to that person comes up to you later and says, oh, hey, yeah, I'm Johnny. You know, I'm the person who was sitting next to the person that had the good idea. Right. So it's like, if you want to be very even, maintaining a non-judgmental stance, right? You want to be drawing out other people's voices. So the more that you can affirm any participation at all, thank you very much for sharing. That's really helpful to hear, you know, to everybody. Can help more people feel whatever, more excited about sharing, more, you know, like they have something to offer the room. So next slide. Next slide. Right, yeah, I had try not to call out or call in you know, any people's ideas here. The one question at a time, ask only one question at a time. Again, especially I think with the balancing questions, you want to just make sure you make space for each question. Sometimes when you feel like you're not getting a lot of conversation, it can be easy to group a lot of questions together, and sometimes that can work, but what that can also do sometimes is confuse people and they don't know which question they're responding to. So it's something else to be aware of. And here the second point is just being sensitive, again, informing your questions. Words mean different things to different people, and some words may need to be defined, like sustainable, or I don't know. There's a lot of words out there that can have different meanings for people. So just be aware of that. And maybe if you're not getting responses, it could be that the word you're using is confusing and you just need to just pause for a minute and say, you know, is that clear? Does that make sense? Should we come up with a definition for what this word is, if you need to use that word, or think of a different way to say it. And yeah, if somebody responds and you don't quite understand what they're getting at, you can ask for a specific example, or an example, or I say your illustration, right? You know, tell me more about what you mean by that, or give us an example of when that happened. And that can help, again, it helps the whole room understand. If you don't understand as a facilitator, there's probably other people in the room also that don't understand what somebody said. So it will help everybody to get some more clarity. Yeah. So last slide, next slide, not the last slide. So what images stick with you from this training? You can either type it in the chat or you can even have my chat open. Slowing down. Yeah. Backing up. Kids building raised beds. Yeah, some of our images from our fake conversations. Being prepared for your meeting. Yeah, where are you feeling energized coming out of this? We'll want to try this out soon. Where are you guys confused? Where are you still anxious or confused about this method? How to direct people back to the topic. Working with people who are constantly trying to derail the conversation. People who take up a lot of space. I think we're going to get at that at our November one, talking about some difficult meeting dynamics. Crafting questions. A little confused. Having questions about shared decision making, more time to explore how this works. Have questions about shared decision making. Karen, is that a request?
Oh, I think it was really about in the decisional stage.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
how
what supports
we
you
didn't
need?
have a lot of time to do that. So I'm curious
All right.
how that starts to unfold.
Yeah.
And everybody's points of view in, and can they respond to other people's proposals or whatever happens, how that works.
It's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think I know we're getting close to time, so I don't want to go into this too much, but that's an important question. I think that, yeah, I mean, this is focused conversation is really a method to get to shared awareness. And ideally you can get to some resolve on a decision, but you're right, it doesn't necessarily always lead to just like shared agreement and now we're going to move forward. I think something that's really useful is for helping everybody's ideas get out and having some good strategic interpretation happening. And so the decisional might be like, what do we need to do next? It might be like, oh, we have to have a meeting where we vote on our options that we have, or we have to, right? It might not be, okay, we're going to go with decision, with option, C and move forward. It might not get to that. But at least everybody has sort of heard the different perspectives and the possible ideas and the assets and the things that people can bring to the table. So it's the shared awareness that I think is the real key of this method. And so, yeah, it depends on the, I guess, just the sort of the stakes of the particular topic that you're talking about, is how far you're going to get with it.
Thank you, that was helpful.
Yeah, and so what other support would you need in attempting this? And while anybody's writing anything, I will share that there is another handout that you have from this meeting, and it is a worksheet. And what it has are it's a worksheet with, with the 4 levels, and then it has possible questions at each level. You're not going to use all those questions. It's all going to depend on what your topic is. But again, it's a place to start to form your questions. Somebody was mentioning maybe wanting to just how do I form questions? Like what questions do I actually ask at this level? So that is a good place to sort of get you started if you want to try this at your next meeting. You can use that to structure your agenda for that topic. And Leslie is writing. Thank you, questions will help. Yeah, so we'll definitely send that out. Leslie, you sent a link here. Oh, this is a Zoom for November 1st. A recording of our slides will be shared after the session. Please register for session 3 presented on Tuesday, November 1st. and that's the registration link. And yeah, let's definitely make sure that we get that worksheet out to everyone today as well. We can go to the last slide. Michi, if you can. These are just some resources if you want to look. Yeah, and they are all in English. So my apologies. But that is it for today.
This is Leslie. Thank you all so much for joining today. Thank you, Aley, for an amazing presentation. I learned a lot. I'm really excited for our third and final session. I put the registration link in the chat, but you'll also be getting an email. And I will send out the worksheets, the recording, and even our little prompt that we used today. So at the end of the next session in November, you will all receive an evaluation. It'll be one evaluation for the 3-part series. And we welcome all the feedback that we can get. And I hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you so much, LJ.
Yeah, thank you, LJ. Thank you, everyone, for your participation.
Night. Night.